Have you ever wondered how the pros always seem to get to the kitchen? Well, today I'm going to share 9 rules that will help you get to the kitchen more often than 99% of players. We'll walk through every rule, explain why they work, and show you how anybody can implement them into their own game. But first, I have some incredible data that shows why getting to the kitchen is the most important ability for you to develop before anything else. Looking at 100+ pro matches, what they found is that 65% of the time, the team that got to the kitchen more frequently won the match. And for pros, the winning team would get to the kitchen 5% more than the losing team. But in amateur, that number increased to 10%. So how often you get to the kitchen is a huge determinant of the winning team, especially in amateur games. And if you think about it, that makes a ton of sense because you can only score when you serve. So the more opportunities you get to the kitchen, the more opportunities you have to score.
I would have to say that is getting to the net some way, somehow, safely. That could mean having a good third shot drop. It could be having a good midcourt. It could be having a good drive, then a drop. There's a lot of techniques to get you to the net safely, but you're really not going to win many points unless you're at the net a lot. So I just say getting to the net as best you can would be the #1 thing.
When I first started playing tournaments, I could not get to the kitchen consistently. It felt like we were either winning in transition or getting a ball smashed on us. Our strategy was to hit drives. If I hit a good one, sometimes we'd win a free point, but whenever that didn't work, we were getting punished. Only later did I realize that it was because I was driving balls that were either too deep, too short, or too low. Which brings me to the first rule. Only drive balls that are a little bit shorter and a little bit higher. Drop everything else. Once I stopped driving balls that were too deep or too low, my drive started crossing the net at a lower height and catching my opponents off guard more often, which made it next to impossible for them to slam it on my partner. Just surviving the 4th shot wasn't enough. We still needed to make it to the kitchen. It wasn't happening all the time, even if I hit a great drive. We'd get a weaker 4th from our opponent, and I would get excited and want to drive the ball again. What I didn't realize until later is that that second drive on my 5th shot was almost always worse than my 3rd shot. I might hit it well, but the results were always worse. And the reason for that is, unlike the 3rd, by the time I hit the 5th shot, both of my opponents are already at the kitchen line, just sitting there waiting to block the ball that I hit at them. I don't have the opportunity anymore to catch one of them coming in. So I learned a new rule, which was to never drive the 5th shot. Instead, I viewed the drive as a tool to set up an easier 5th shot drop, which was the first combo that I started putting together that got me to the kitchen regularly. And when you watch pros like Ben Johns, this has become a super common pattern. Pros are driving it more frequently than ever, but almost never are they driving the 5th shot. Once I reached 5-0, I was making my drops. But some days they just weren't landing. There was one big match I played with my partner and we made the finals. Overall, the match felt pretty evenly matched, but we just weren't making it in. And a big part of that was my drops landing short. They would clip the net, dribble back over, my opponents would celebrate, and I would feel like crap. I must have watched the replay of that match a dozen times. And what I came to realize is that even if one of us hit a pretty bad drop, as long as it crossed the net, we were still in the point. It was going to be difficult for us to get in, but we did get in to the kitchen line many times. But if the ball doesn't even go over the net, the point's totally over. We've lost our opportunity, which helped me realize the 3rd rule, which is to miss long versus missing short. If you miss long, you're still in the point. But a new problem arose. When I got nervous in tournaments, I would worry so much about my drops going over the net. Those nerves would translate into me hitting the ball too high. They would float up and my opponents would just be able to hit down on them, making it really difficult for us to get into the kitchen. This became a bigger and bigger problem as I started playing pros with even more offense at the kitchen line. And what I realized is that if I hit it long, they could attack it, but it'd still be difficult for them to generate a ton of offense off it. But if I hit it high, they were smacking it down. So that became the 4th rule, preferring to miss long and low versus high and perfectly dropping into the kitchen.
If I hit a drop that is so high, then it's gonna, what Daniel was saying, a drop that is so high, it's gonna bounce in the kitchen, which is good, but if it's gonna bounce above the net, that is not necessarily the best drop in the world because then he can still hit down on it. And the thing we don't want our opponent doing is hitting down on the ball. We want everything being lifted by our opponent.
And this rule isn't intuitive because when we think about drops, we're always thinking about getting the ball to land near our opponent's feet. That's what everybody teaches. But even if you accomplish that and the ball bounces high up, if you're playing a strong player, they can back up and then hit a shot with a ton of offense off the bounce. But if you hit it lower and it travels a little bit further and they're able to get it out of the air and roll it, if it's low enough, they really can't do much with it. And oftentimes actually they'll get excited to roll it and you might be able to come in and attack that ball. Between rules in 3 and 4, the way to think about the drop is to try to avoid ever hitting it short. And if you hit it long, it's better for it to be low than for it to be high. Now, rules 1 through 4 gave me the tools to know when to drop and when to drive, and then how to think about the drop and the drive. But to make things as easy as possible, you have to start thinking about your opponents. Earlier in my progression, I tried to simplify everything so I could be laser focused on developing the things that I needed to develop. And part of that simplification was I hit every drop cross court and I hit every drive through the middle. And that served me pretty well until I realized that there were a lot of cases when that's not the best strategy. The most extreme version of that came up when I played a tournament and our opponent's 6'5" or 6'6" guy who could reach over and get everything, and his partner who was kind of a short king. The guy that was longer and taller, he could punish any ball he could reach when we were trying to make it into the kitchen, and his shorter partner couldn't reach as many balls as him, so he had a lot less offense. I hadn't really practiced targeting a player when trying to get into the kitchen, so I couldn't do it. When I tried to do something I hadn't practiced, I would make errors and it'd be even worse than just sticking to what I knew, which was dropping cross court and driving down the center. After that match though, I had to go and learn it. I developed the versatility to hit those shots any spot in the court, cross court, down the line, or in the middle. That let me start to target the player with less offense on the opposing team, which as a general rule makes sense. That is a mistake a lot of players make. They don't recognize which player they should be targeting. A lot of times when they recognize it, they don't know how to execute on it. It's worth calling out, offense isn't just who can hit the ball harder, it can also be who's in a more comfortable spot on the court. So the player that's still coming into the net off of a return, they tend to have less offense because they'll have to hit the ball midway in transition if you get an opportunity to hit a good drop or a drive to them. But as a general rule, think about who's going to hit a weaker ball off of your drop or drive and hit the ball to them. Now, all of the rules up until this point should give you a pretty good idea of which shot you want to hit and where, but it hasn't said anything about your movement. Knowing when to start advancing into the kitchen is one of the most difficult and important things that you can develop. This was the most common question that members of the inner circle had. So we're gonna make sure to answer this. Before every video, I ask the inner circle what questions they need answered, and for this video, this was the one. When I was playing in 4-5, I would hit a drop or drive and then instantly start moving forward. Then if we didn't hit a perfect drop or drive, our opponents would punish us, and then I'd look around like, what happened? This should help explain why we had so much trouble getting the ball smashed on us, like I mentioned earlier in the video. What I learned is I needed to look for signs from my opponent on whether or not it was a good opportunity to move forward. And the best tell is the paddle face. So if their paddle face is open like this, that means they're gonna hit up on the ball, which means they're not gonna have a lot of offense and it's a good opportunity to move in. If the face is like this, then it's kind of 50-50 and you're gonna have to judge for yourself whether or not it's a good opportunity or not. And then if they're hitting down on the ball from up high, you're probably gonna stay put and just maybe even take a few steps back, make another attempt, hit another drop, maybe have to hit a reset and be patient as you move in. But as soon as you see like they're gonna hit the ball with an open face, they're gonna hit up on the ball, that's a pretty safe bet that you can start making some progress towards the kitchen. Now, if you want your questions answered in a future video, make sure to join the inner circle. It's free and it's the best way to interact with myself and the rest of the community. I'll post a link in the description. Since we're looking for that softer ball from our opponents, we might need to be patient because we might not earn that shot right away. I used to think the best way to get to the kitchen was to just hit a beautiful drop or drive and then just rush in. And sure, that is a great way to do it, but that isn't reliable for anybody. Even Ben and Colin Johns oftentimes are having to hit a third and then a fifth and then a seventh and then a ninth, sometimes even more shots before they can get into the kitchen. But I didn't realize that. So if we weren't getting in right away, we were in trouble. We probably weren't gonna get in ever. But as I got up to higher levels, I realized how normal it was to have to hit several balls in transition before you can actually make it in. That's rule 7, is to be as patient as necessary as you're moving your way in. People tend to make the transition zone seem really scary, like no man's land, but actually it's not no man's land. It's somewhere that you should actually be pretty often. You don't want to stay there forever, but you need to stay there as long as it takes for you to make your way up into the kitchen. And by the way, this applies when your partner is hitting the ball too. One of the biggest mistakes I would make is when my partner was hitting a third or fifth, I would just cheat straight up because I was looking for a juicy ball to poach. But more often than not, I wouldn't get a ball to poach, and instead I would just get the ball hit right past me. And when that happened, I actually wasn't sure who to blame. I sometimes would look at my partner and be like, it's okay, man, as if to say that's your fault in a really kind and polite way. What I realized later is actually my fault. I shouldn't be caught in no man's land when my opponents have a ball to smack down on me. So rule 8 is to only cheat forward when you feel confident that your opponent is going to have to hit a weaker shot off of your partner's drop or drive. And finally, one of the best ways to make it easier on yourself to get into the kitchen is to actually hit a bigger serve. Because when you hit a bigger bigger serve, your opponents are gonna hit a weaker return, which is gonna make it easier for you to hit a solid drive or a drop. That's rule 9. Hit a deeper, bigger serve if you can to earn a weaker return to make your trip to the kitchen a little bit easier. Now, you might be wondering, what should I focus on after I master getting to the kitchen? Well, I made a video documenting my journey from beginner to 5.0 and beyond, and I break down what your singular focus should be at each level of your development. It covers my experience at each stage, what I learned, and what you can take away from it and incorporate into your own game. Watch that video here.